just like dancing to like pop music. It's not ballroom. It's not ballroom.
So there's several different ways you could help us that would be immense help. One is just to become involved. If you'll go on your social media platforms, Faith for Fathers on Facebook or on Twitter, and just follow us and like and comment and share different things we post. Obviously, we would love for you to participate in this event, you and your families, and to tell people within your circle of influence about it. And thirdly, we are seeking sponsors for this event. We're brand new to the Greenville area, and so we would love to connect and have some businesses partner with us. I will tell you, we just confirmed this morning that Perry Tuttle, Clemson alumni, is going to be our featured speaker for all 3 nights for our event this year. So we're excited to have him come and just pour into the lives of our fathers that night. And I want to show you, if you will go to this link, our registration does not open for our Greenville event officially until Monday morning. But we have a backdoor link just for people who are here today. I'll tell you, our Spartanburg registration opened yesterday morning, and we sold 125 tickets in the first 24 hours. So we expect Greenville to sell out very quickly. Or you can text that number right there, and we will reply with a link that you can go right to our registration page, and you can do that early before it opens on Monday. So I hope all of you will figure out some way that you can partner with Faith for Fathers as we seek to bring this ministry to the Greenville community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for the work you all do through Faith for Fathers to keep dads engaged in the lives of their children. And now we're to the point everybody came for, and that's we're going to hear from our own U.S. Congressman Trey Gowdy. Now, it's an election year. Has anybody noticed that? It's an election year, and a lot of people are trying to talk about their faith and trying to convince us they really know the Lord. We have a lot of people quoting Bible verses. Some of them succeed, some of them don't. Congressman Gowdy knows that Job is actually in the Old Testament. It's not the New Testament. It's not Job. He also knows that 2 Corinthians, not 2 Corinthians. So it's all about who you are when people aren't looking. I think Congressman J.C. Watt said integrity or character is what you do when no one's paying attention. And I'm here to tell you, our Congressman Trey Gowdy has been a consistent warrior for limited government, for freedom, and for our Christian values in Washington. He did that first, even here in South Carolina. This is a solicitor from Spartanburg County. Doing the work, the Lord's work in the city of Satan in Washington, D.C., you can ensure that. Because it's a tough time right now to be a Christian in public life and to be a person of faith who practices those convictions. So we're honored to have Congressman Gowdy here. Please welcome him as he speaks to us at the Christian Chamber of Commerce, Congressman Trey Gowdy.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate that, brother. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, William. Thank each of you for coming. I do want to ask you up front if you would please keep the United States Senate in your thoughts and prayers. I heard from Senator Scott last night that they cast 2 votes yesterday, so a number of them are being treated for exhaustion and fatigue in Washington. Wow. Y'all got that, didn't you? You got it, you just didn't think it was funny. I do want to introduce Cindy Crick, who works with me and has since the solicitor's office. And she and her husband live here in Greenville. Her husband's assistant United States attorney, and they have a handsome young boy named Smith, who I think turned 7 either today or tomorrow. So, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and heal their land. When I first read that verse, my eyes immediately went to the very first part, if my people. Notice it does not say if John Boehner would only do this. If Paul Ryan were only smart enough to know that. If only Harry Reid were not the majority leader over the past several years. If only the Supreme Court had the wisdom to decide such and such. If only the state Senate would do X, Y, or Z. It doesn't say that. It says, if my people. So this verse is for you. It's for the same everyday average Americans that built this country, that preserved this country, that have served this country, that have defended this country. And it makes sense that it would be about you and not about people in politics, because politics is a lagging indicator. If you are looking for leadership in life, do not look to Columbia or Washington. Politics reacts. It doesn't lead. So this verse and what I have to say today is about you. It's not about any of my colleagues. It's not about folks in the State House. Who's on the Supreme Court is really, really important, but it's not about them either. Even within the course of my lifetime, I have noticed a diminution in the influence of the church and an increase in the influence of the state, even in the course of the past 50 years. It's been fairly dramatic, actually. I want you to ask yourself, who do poor people in Greenville and Spartanburg look to for help? Yeah, and you're saying, how could you possibly say that on the aftermath of a video about Habitat for Humanity? But you know the answer to it. Who do they look to? Not who are they grateful for episodically. Who do they intrinsically look to for help? Who do poor people look to? The church or government? How about health care? And yes, I'm aware that there are free clinics. My father has volunteered for one as a former physician. But who do people fundamentally look to for their health care? The church when they're sick? The church or government? How about retirement? Are you counting on your kids? I'm not. You counting on your Sunday school class? You counting on your church? How about if your kids aren't being educated to your level of satisfaction? Who do you blame? You blame yourself? You blame the local school board? You blame the teachers? Even within our lifetime, the influence of the church has waned and the influence of government has increased. And actually, that is undeniable. It's undeniable in reality and it's undeniable statistically. And there will come a point for you, perhaps, as there did for me, where you realize that if you don't necessarily believe that government should be responsible for all of that you're in the minority. Perhaps that was the dominant view 50, 75 years ago, but it is not now. And if you doubt it, talk to young people. Ask them who's responsible for their education, for health care, for their retirement. They'll say it's the government. So the church is decreasing, the state is increasing, and if you have that order switched in your own soul, then you're in the minority. And I realized about 10 years ago that I was in the minority. And Cindy may remember this, or she may have opted out when I made everyone at the district attorney's office read something called the Million Dialogue. It's by a guy named Thucydides. It's in a book he wrote called The Peloponnesian War, and it's a dialogue between the Millions and the Athenians. And the Athenians were really strong, and they invaded the island of Melos, and they wanted the Millions to surrender. And there's a negotiation, there's a dialogue back and forth. And they're very frank. The Athenians said, we're big and strong and we're going to destroy you. And the Millions tried to negotiate and tried to buy time, but ultimately they maintained their purity. They were just purely destroyed. It is the lesson that most political scientists will point to for pragmatism or political reality. That you have to negotiate at some point, that you have to surrender some deeply held conviction because ultimately you may meet a force that is so much more powerful than you are that they'll obliterate you. And that's what the Millions met, and that's why you don't hear about the Millions anymore, because the Athenians did exactly what they said they would do, and they wiped them from the face of the earth. So after I had my office read the Million Dialogue, I asked them, which do you value more? Freedom or truth? And every single person at my DA's office said they valued freedom over truth. So then I said, well, which do you value more, unity or diversity? And everyone but one said they valued diversity over unity. That's when I realized that I was in the minority. Because I do not understand what the virtue in being free to be wrong is. If you have the choice between truth and freedom, I do not understand why you would choose the freedom to be wrong, unless you just don't believe that there's anything called truth. And I'm glad that we don't all pull for the same football teams, and I'm glad that we don't all want to eat at the same restaurant at the same time, and I'm glad we don't all have the same eye color. I appreciate the diversity. But at some point, you better figure out what you have in common with other people, or then we're just united by geography. Is there some commonality among us? Is there a common code? So you go back to this verse, and the verse would tell you that yes, there is a common code, and this is how I know it. If my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their what? If there's a wicked way, then that means there must be a just way, right? So there is some good versus evil. There is some code by which we are supposed to live by, or else there wouldn't be the word wicked in that verse. It would all be relative. For 16 years, I stood in front of 12 people who could not get out of jury service. That's how I made a living. They didn't know the clerk of court, they didn't know the sheriff, they didn't know anybody on county council, they were stuck on jury service. Never once did I have to prove to a jury that murder was wrong. Never once did I have to prove that hurting a child was wrong. You may have to prove that somebody did it, but you never had to prove it was wrong. Does anybody have to prove to you that discrimination is wrong? Does anybody have to prove to you that stealing is wrong? No. There is a code by which we live by. The question is, what is the source of that code? Is it science? Is it man? Because if it's man, then yes, you can have marriage defined a certain way for several thousand years, and then in a 5-4 decision, you can have one person redefine it. If that's the author of your code. So is there a code? Who's the author of that code? And if you are vexed and perplexed, as I am, by the relativism that exists in our country, and you believe, as I do believe, and maybe not in the upstate of South Carolina, maybe not in the 4th Congressional District, maybe not among your friends do you feel like you are in the minority. But honestly, in your well of souls, as you think about the country as a whole, do you think you're in the minority? I do. So what do you do if you're in the minority? You got a couple of options. You can change your core values and join the majority so you can be free to govern. You can do that. Or you can say, you know what? I'm this remnant that once was and hopefully in the future will be, but I'm in the minority and I want to become the majority, so I need to persuade. Are you equipped to persuade? If you do believe that there is a common code by which we're supposed to live by, and you believe that that common code has a source and an author, and it is not relative, I mean, ask yourself, what do you believe? Do you believe in personal responsibility? Why? Why do you believe in it? Because you like seeing people get in trouble? Or because if you're going to live in a free society, there has to be a corresponding responsibility. It's commonsensical. Take education. I don't know anyone that doesn't think education is the surest pathway to prosperity. It's the closest thing to magic that we have in our culture. Where do you think the decisions about education should be made? Washington? Columbia? Greenville? Your kitchen table? Why? Can you explain why? Do you think a country as rich and prosperous as ours should have a safety net for people who are truly indigent? Do you believe that? I do. Do you think it is incongruent to have a safety net and not accept $800 billion worth of waste, fraud, and abuse over a 10-year time period? Can you reconcile those two? Do you think that there is a shared accountability that goes into shared citizenry? Do you think you owe certain obligations to your fellow citizens? Can you explain why? If you're in the minority and you want to become the majority, you have to not only tell people what you believe, but you have to tell them why you believe it. My guess is, knowing how William feels about lawyers, there probably are not a ton of lawyers here. There are 2 I know of, 3 I know of. But I will tell you this, I'll tell you what every lawyer would tell you if he or she were up here. You don't ever have to prove motive. You never have to prove why somebody did something. But it is the very first question that a jury asks when they go back to the jury room. Why did this person do what they did? And if you're seeking to persuade people in 2016, it is not enough anymore for you to simply tell them what you believe. You have to tell them why. Do you have a definition of marriage in your mind? Do you think the code that you live by defines marriage a certain way? Can you tell people why? Do you have a certain perspective on the beginning of life? Can you tell people why? So when you're in the minority and you strive to be in the majority, the first thing you have to do is know what you believe, and more importantly, I think, in this culture, why you believe it. Secondarily, I want you to ask yourself this question. Ask it in your own well of souls. Is the manner in which you communicate calculated to persuade? And yes, I do have the audacity to say that given our present presidential election dynamics. Yes, I do. Because just because something works for a season doesn't mean it's right. Do you communicate in a manner that is calculated to persuade? In Ecclesiastes, they say there's a time and a season for everything. There's a time to rebuke, there's a time to educate, there's a time to validate, there's a time to ratify. There's also a time to persuade. And if you're in the minority, then what you need to do is persuade so you can become in the majority again. Do you communicate in a fashion that is calculated to persuade? And you may say, well, I don't know how to persuade. I'm not a